Thank you, Deputy Speaker. First of all, I would like to thank all of those who helped me so diligently during the election campaign. I hesitate and actually will not name those that helped me because, as inevitably happens, someone will be forgotten, and that is not my desire. So I thank everyone that helped me, and particularly I thank the people of Tangney for electing me with a record margin, a margin that there has never been in the seat of Tangney. And I see that not only as a testament to the amount of work that I've put in the electorate, but also the standing of the Liberal Party more generally. I will be speaking about a few issues. I'll be talking about our science crisis. I will be talking about climate change. And I will be talking about energy, including, horror of horrors, the N-word. Nuclear as in power. There, I've said it. Now, I guess you could say that I've got a background that is unique in this parliament, not only in this House but in the other House. I'm the only research scientist that has worked in the research industry in either chamber. This allows me a different mindset, a different way of thinking. It gets back to analysis of data and trend analysis. And in terms of trends, I've predicted and led on debates such as climate change, carbon tax and ETS when they were not popular. I've led on nuclear debates in the past, back in 2005. If you look at Hansard, prior to my speech in March 2005, there was not a mention of the nuclear word in Hansard. And I've also been highly critical of the Joint Strike Fighters since 2005, something that is very evident today. In fact, we'd have Joint Strike Fighters in service right now if defence had been believed back in 2005. Now, in Australia, science is in crisis. We need to look at holistic solutions. Professor Jeff Masters of the Australian Council for Educational Research, he's the chief executive, in a media release describes the PISA results as disappointing. Indeed, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study of 2011 shows that, with the exception of an improvement in Year 4 mathematics between 1995 and 2011, Australian students' performances in mathematics and science stagnated over that period. During the same period, a number of other countries either dramatically improved their performances, including Singapore, Hong Kong and Chinese Taipei, or showed steady improvements in performance, including Korea and the United States. Professor Masters said, "It is difficult to see how Australia will be in the top 5 countries by 2025 if we continue on the current path. We need to look carefully at what improving countries are doing to see what lessons are for Australia." Now, I've been looking at this issue and consulting widely. In terms of secondary school, I very much support the review of the curriculum as announced by Minister Pyne. Now, a few issues I'd like to broach in terms of some of these issues in improving science, and some of them will probably prove quite controversial, including the first one that I'm going to mention, and that is that subject matter expertise is more important than the teaching diploma. In other words, if we have got the option of having people that have worked in the field as engineers or in the hard sciences wanting to go and teach, we should not bog them down with a necessity to do a full year's teacher's training diploma in order to teach. We should expedite the process, make it very quick, perhaps have mentors, but get those people in and teaching. We need to fast-track them, in other words. We need to pay the hard sciences and maths teachers more, simply reflecting market reality. There's a greater demand for people in the hard sciences and maths in the market, so that we need to pay them more to get the good students to go and do teaching. This is even potentially at the expense of class size. I would rather see an expert teacher teaching a larger class than have a smaller class size but a teacher that is struggling with the subject matter themselves. In terms of tertiary education, we've got to stop student feedback being a metric of training quality. Difficult courses will be much harder to make popular with students than easier ones. So we need to make sure that the quality of the teaching is actually reflected by measuring the output, the quality of the students' results, rather than a popularity contest. Students also in the hard sciences and maths should take courses in entrepreneurship, intellectual property and patents. In terms of tertiary research, we need to get rid of an act that we enacted just last year, and that is the Defence Trade Controls Act, or the DTCA, and put in a much less onerous agenda around the alignment of our legislation with the US ITARs, or the International Trade in Arms Regulations. At the moment, the way it is, we're going to punish our research sector when this act takes effect next year. We must not make defence the arbiters of what can and what cannot be independently researched in Australia. I believe we should also be looking to the research sector, and this includes restrictive contracts that are drawn up between CSIRO and the universities. Indeed, I was on the advisory board of the ARC Centre for Excellence for Antimatter Matter Studies, and we really wanted to bring CSIRO in as one of the partners with that research. But the provisions that the CSIRO sought to put on us as far as IP was concerned was so onerous that it was far better just to leave CSIRO out, which is a tragedy. We need to ensure that the ARC, or Australian Research Council, provides more funding for risky research rather than what I'd call backfill research, which is research that is far less risky, where you put in a bid for your research proposal knowing what you're going to get at the end. We need to increase diversity of the sort of research that is undertaken under the ARC by having overseas experts act as referees for some research proposals where there is inadequate expertise to do this in Australia. The moment they're subject to areas where we have got one or two researchers doing very good work, but we're unable to get people to referee research proposals from these people because we lack that expertise in Australia. We need to ensure that those research areas don't completely wither and die simply for lack of available referees in Australia. We also need to fund more cross and multidisciplinary research, and I would put that the ARC Centres for Excellence are an excellent model for this, where the ARC Centres for Excellence are about multiple organisations working together in a multidisciplinary sense. It also enables funding to be granted for longer periods of time, so scientists are not madly filling out research proposal after research proposal, which is a waste of time of the scientists' expertise. Rather get rid of that bureaucratese, if you will. In my view, we need to remove any research priority on politically hot topics, such as, for example, climate change. The reason that I say this is I had a very senior scientist admit to me in discussions, and I'm not going to say who it was, what the organisation was, I don't want to identify this person, but he said to me that a certain area of research was nonsense, it was never going to work, but he said, I couldn't have said that 12 months ago because we had research that we were undertaking in that area. Science is not supposed to be about convenient definitions and conveniences as far as funding is concerned. Science is supposed to be about a search for truth. We need to have research that is agreed to. The ARC at the moment, the research proposals that get through are only funded to about 80% of their funding level, of the level requested. There's a huge problem, obviously, with this, because if you're funded to 80% of what you requested to do a piece of work, straight away it changes the bounds of that work that you're going to undertake, because you can only undertake 80% of it. I think that we need to fully fund our proposals that are approved, and preferably, like the United States, not only fully fund, but actually provide contingency funding as well. This would enable that research to be done as agreed, so there are no excuses after the fact for research that is not undertaken. We should also specify there are what are called linkage grants, which are grants that are there specifically to link industry with science. We should specify a minimum percentage of linkage grants that need to be new linkages with industry, which would then force further outreach between research and industry. The problem is, at the moment, it's all too convenient just to go back to the industry partners that you're familiar with. With the CSIRO, in my view, we need to gradually remove the outside funding requirement. I remember when so-called 30%ers came in the late 80s. It was done for very good reason, to make CSIRO more responsive and more applicable to industry. The problem is it actually distorted things, where far more than 30% of the effort was went into chasing that 30% of grants or 30% of funding. And in addition to that, the level of research done in those 30%ers equated very often to what was equivalent to Mr. Fix-It jobs rather than real research. We need to introduce a scheme similar to the United States Small Business Innovation Research Program to encourage innovation. This will allow a whole lot of spin-off companies to very easily begin. We need to expedite IP processes, and we need to ensure that CSIRO and the universities are aware that intellectual property is a perishable commodity, and that it becomes less valuable over time. So rather than trying to squeeze absolutely the nth degree out of it with lengthy processes to try and maximise that IP, in which time people are less likely to pay for it anyway because there will be alternatives out there, actually expedite that process, get that IP signed off as quickly as possible. Now, as far as climate change and the carbon tax is concerned, the carbon tax is a $9 billion a year hit on jobs. Unemployment already is 110,000 higher now than it was in July 2012 when the carbon tax was introduced. The carbon tax, even by the former government's own figures, is a giant handbrake on the economy. Labor's own figures state that by mid-century our economy will be $1 trillion smaller, a cumulative $1 trillion smaller, with the carbon tax than without it. And all of this for no defined reduction in global average temperatures. There's a complete disconnect with this whole mechanism with carbon dioxide and global average temperatures, which is what it's supposed to be all about. Now, in terms of the renewable energy target, I welcome the review of the renewable energy target that was announced by the Ministers for Industry and the Environment. Judith Sloan has pointed out that the RET by 2020 will increase electricity prices by 40 to 45%. In my view, get rid of the RET, honour the contracts that have already been signed, and let the market decide on a completely level playing field. The showstopper for renewables, quite frankly, in terms of baseload power, is storage. So we should look at the cheap end of the innovation pipeline. That is research, where instead of forcing uneconomic energy solutions on the market, we actually try to get a solution where we can gain benefit from the IP. RETs and the equivalent damage economies, you need only look at Spain, where they embarked on a massive renewable program, to see the effects of this. In terms of climate change, we have cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. Indeed, we saw Professor Chris Turney get stuck in his own experiment, yet he still has no doubts about, in inverted commas, the science. There is no the science. Science is a process, it's not a noun. The simple fact is, if back in 1995 I'd made a prediction of future global average temperatures, and I'd said next year and every year afterwards is going to be the same as this year, I would have been far closer to what's eventuated than the IPCC projections and predictions of that time. There's been a lack of warming for well over 10 years, contrary to model projections. There's a lot of bad science, quite frankly, that goes on in this. For instance, you have people that have got a certain paradigm that they accept. When you give them contrary data and evidence, they look at ways in which to explain that contrary data and evidence in terms of the paradigm that they accept, rather than questioning, does the paradigm I accept actually hold? Appeals to authority and consensus show weakness in argument. For instance, when's the last time you heard the consensus of the world scientists is that the Earth orbits the Sun? Indeed, Newton's equations of motion were seen as a complete solution to mechanics for a period of nearly 200 years, until Lorentz transforms and Einstein's theory of relativity. I mean, it's ironic. The Bureau of Meteorology said last year is the hottest year on record. They don't talk about any sort of adjustments that they make to the data, and it's something that I will be asking questions on. But furthermore, what about the 1890s and early 1900s, where it was very warm and in all probability quite a bit warmer than last year? The Bureau of Met says, well, that temperature data is unreliable. But here's the catch. The IPCC has temperature data going back to 1850. Now, even if you accept that the rest of the world's temperature measurements were reliable, big call considering it was 1871 where you had Stanley saying, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. You can imagine the temperature measurements in Africa at that time. But even if all of those other measurements were accurate, you've got this massive section of the globe called Australasia, where by the Bureau of Met's own acknowledgement, the records are unreliable. Now, in terms of nuclear power, we talk about power baseload solutions. Japan is in the process of reopening many nuclear power stations. Now, Germany has failed comprehensively with renewables, but they've refused to expand their nuclear power industry. So guess where they're going? Going back to more coal-fired power. At present, the only way to generate baseload in Australia, apart from coal and gas, is nuclear. Renewables do not cut it. Sorry, they just don't. They don't cut it economically, and they don't cut it in terms of reliability. Nuclear is economically competitive. It was marginally uncompetitive when Switkowski did his review back in 2006-07. But we've seen electricity prices rise to reflect the reality of the market as far as gas and coal-fired power is concerned. And nuclear is very much in the picture. It's in the picture in the US. In fact, it's the cheapest method of generating power in the US, and similarly in South Africa. Quite frankly, in Australia, we need to seize that opportunity. Burying our heads in the sand and saying no, nuclear, terrible technology, etc., is just burying our heads in the sand. It's the safest method of generating power out there, by far. And obviously, for Australia, there would be scientific benefits as well in terms of training more nuclear engineers, more nuclear physicists, areas where we're screaming out for more requirements for more engineers, particularly with things like the car industry going. Where are the engineers going to be employed? Nuclear energy is a very good start.